This episode is part of a long series exploring how some evangelicals tied themselves to the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s. It starts with the episode Prologue, What is Biblical? This episode will refer to a lot of the previous ones, but may still stand on its own. At this point in the season, we're looking at some of the evangelicals with large followings who took part in that process. Jerry Falwell, Bill Bright, Pat Robertson in this episode, and soon we'll cover Tim LaHaye. This is not going to be exhaustive. I've just chosen a few I think are worth understanding. This is Pat Robertson and the Prosperity Gospel. Rigby, Idaho is a small town just north of Idaho Falls. A few restaurants, a grocery store, population of about 5,700 people. The highway goes right through it, and when you get just outside the commercial district, you roll into agriculture. Think potatoes. Near the center of town is a low tan building with a small tower, the Farnsworth TV and Pioneer Museum. My brother and I visited about a year ago. It's a mishmash of items: animal skins, early vehicles for traveling across snow, a collection of what the 1900s brought, general prosperity, appliances, gadgets, stuff that made people's life easier, and some things you can't imagine anyone using. I took some audio from our home movies. Get ready to be excited. That there is the Lippincott planimeter. And we don't know what it does. Or why there's a sand dollar. Or why the sand dollar poem. Near the entrance was a mannequin sitting in a chair. Its hair was covered in pads and spindles connected to iffy-looking wires, like something you'd see in a horror film. Back in the 1950s, if you want a perm, you could put your head inside this contraption. Which looks perfectly safe. Yeah. Especially with water around and children running around. Yeah, then what could go wrong? For all of the mundane and strange items, toward the back is a collection of legitimate artifacts. Pieces of an invention that revolutionized not just the country, but the world. The display started with a series of what looked like light bulbs. I'm just going to read this one little document here. While working on his father's farm in Rigby, Idaho, which is where we are, Philo T. Farnsworth, age 14, conceived the first all-electronic television system. He described the concept to his chemistry teacher, Justin Tallman, in 1922. We won't get too far into the technical stuff. He envisioned a vacuum tube with a photosensitive surface where the image could be scanned electronically much faster than rotating mechanical discs that others had tried. He called this device the image dissector. 5 years later, in 1927, he managed to scan and display a single line of an image in another room. The technical descriptions lost me almost immediately. When light strikes the cesium oxide target screen, electrons are knocked off. We were surrounded by old technology, cameras, a banner that read Philo T. Farnsworth presenting his original TV tubes to Rigby High School, 1956. Not to mention a smattering of documents behind display cases, including a degree of Doctorate of Science from Brigham Young University for Philo Farnsworth. Right here. Nearby was a copy of Farnsworth's patent. Looks like it's patent number 1,773,980. This invention revolutionized communications. It spread the gospel of consumerism. Soon, there was a television set in nearly every household. Like films and radio, the technology did not escape the notice of Christians. Not only were preachers on TV, but they operated satellite communications hubs and pulled in tens of millions of dollars a year. They interviewed actors, musicians, and politicians, leveraging their audiences to enrich themselves and choose sides in a political battle. Today, the story of a medium that merged politics and faith and helped to legitimize Pentecostals in the American psyche. One of the pioneers of the field was Pat Robertson, a charming, charismatic man who made some big claims. He built a television empire, a university, a humanitarian organization, then used his platform to tie his ministries to the Republican Party. Long before a reality TV star won the presidency, this television icon tried to steer the GOP and become commander-in-chief. He did it by harnessing a technology dreamed up by a 14-year-old kid in a field in Idaho. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Staron, and this is Truce. The year was 1906, Christmas Eve. A Canadian scientist working in the U.S. named Reginald Fessenden broadcast a program to ships at sea for the U.S. Navy and the United Fruit Company from Brant Rock, Massachusetts. The first radio broadcast for entertainment and music. The program consisted of Reginald and his wife playing O Holy Night. Someone read the nativity passage from the Gospel of Luke.
They hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger.
Christianity was there from the birth of radio. The radio airwaves belonged to the people, and a certain amount of broadcast time was set aside for their good. Public service announcements, educational shows. Sometimes, instead of stations creating their own expensive programming, they invited on preachers. But that opened the door for problems. Like if a preacher or priest said,
"Terrible things about the Jewish people that I cannot and will not air here."
Like Father Coughlin did in the 1930s. Or,
"Declared something from the pulpit that was controversial."
And the radio station was on the hook. So first, NBC and then other networks entrusted the Federal Council of Churches with the task of weeding out the problematic personalities. It saved NBC time and money and placed the onus of choice on the council. But
The Federal Council of Churches is made up of modernists who don't believe in the miraculous or that Jesus is the Son of God.
which sounds harsh, but is actually true. Only liberals who like to play fast and loose with Scripture could get on air. They were the gatekeepers, which is one reason why fundamentalists, and to be more specific, neo-evangelicals, founded the National Association of Evangelicals, or NAE, to get them access to airtime. I started the season with this, and now it's time to show you why. If you'll remember, the NAE did two consequential things. One, it opened up avenues for fundamentalist and evangelical preachers to access the airwaves. And two, it allowed Pentecostal believers into their movement. And those two things, well, they went hand in hand. Broadcasting and Pentecostals. Because generally, traditional church services are kind of mellow and a little slow.
Please turn in your hymnals to page 247.
But with Pentecostalism, there's this sense that something unexpected could happen at any moment. Maybe this is a good time to remind people what Pentecostalism is. Here's my friend Kenneth to help explain.
According to historian Francis Fitzgerald, it grew out of the holiness movement,
Which I covered last season if you want more details. It's why I talked about it at all, knowing that it would be important now.
Holiness mixed with a bunch of movements like Methodism. It all came together in Los Angeles. Why is that important?
Because so much of this season comes from Southern California. The ministry of R.J. Rushdoony, the John Birch Society, wealthy financiers of the religious right, like Walter Knott, who funded the Barry Goldwater campaign. The Jesus movement, which we're not really going to get into, where hippies and counterculture met Christianity. SoCal all the way. Also, it was the future home of TBN, one of the largest broadcasting networks in the world, which is also Pentecostal.
All that and more, including the Pentecostal movement itself. It started in LA in 1906, then spread across the South and the Southwest. Its defining features are gifts of the Holy Spirit, like speaking in tongues, prophecy, healing. Believing all of that is available to Christians today.
It started among poor people.
But in the 1950s, it spread to middle-income people too, and their ideas touched every part of Protestantism and even Catholicism.
One of the ways they went mainstream was through the media, through guys like Rex Humbert, Jimmy Swaggart, and Pat Robertson. By 1980, Pentecostals had the lion's share of religious television, with one fundamentalist sneaking into the charts, Jerry Falwell.
By the way, which city in the U.S. contained Falwell's biggest audience?
Los Angeles, which is in Southern California. Some of those Pentecostals mailed out deliverance cloths or other tchotchkes to the audience if they gave a donation. People like Oral Roberts, one of the godfathers of Pentecostal televangelism.
He grew up in a dirt poor background, Oklahoma backwoods.
This is Jonathan Root. He teaches history at Augusta University. He's the author of Oral Roberts and the Rise of the Prosperity Gospel. Roberts became a preacher after a miraculous healing. The story changed over time. It's messy, so we'll skip it. What mattered was his style.
Insiders and outsiders praised him for his charisma and his ability to captivate an audience.
Even
Calling out demons as he prayed for healing under a big tent.
thousands of people in one space. You can see videos of this online. He was a showman, the kind of person who loved a big top. His radio audience, mailing list, and books were huge in the 40s and 50s.
It was not just a time for revival and evangelism, it was also a time of entertainment. Right? You go to be entertained, you meet people, you interact, it's socializing. Once the tent is no longer as popular as it was as a kind of entertainment, TV replaced it.
Pentecostalism was made for television. The medium requires constant motion. In radio, you can let a moment breathe. Not true in television. Everything has to keep moving. You need big sets, costumes, lights, celebrities. A decade later, in 1978, his ministry had revenues of $60 million.
The most immediate impact is the early Pentecostal televangelist programs resemble what Robertson's was, which was a tent revival, right? A recording of his tent preaching and the healing line. Now that changes in the 60s with the emergence of eventually Pat Robertson, but really Jimmy and Tammy Faye Bakker will change what Christian TV looks like. But for about a decade or so, everybody borrowed Oral Roberts.
Pat Robertson borrowed from him, as did Jim Bakker.
Jim Bakker wanted to be Oral Roberts, build an empire, right?
A key element to a lot of these celebrity Christians. It wasn't enough to be on TV or have a church. They wanted to start a business, schools, publishing houses. Really, the sky was the limit. They desired to be everywhere. Roberts was a showman, flamboyant. Some called him the father of televangelists. A fundraiser. He started a university in his name and a short-lived medical center. He covered all the bases when it came to media. He was also an innovator.
A lot of it before Oral Roberts was positive thinking, right? Kind of this amalgamation of new thought and Christian science. So it's the mind, pejoratively called name it and claim it, right? If you think it, God will bless you. What Roberts does is he adds the mechanism of the blessing pact, where it's about giving and receiving, right? If I give how much money to Roberts' ministry to help him spread the gospel, spread his healing message, God will bless me in return. So that's really his great innovation. The blessing pact, which eventually became more popularly known as seed faith in the 1970s.
The notion that if you give to his ministry, God will bless you. You're essentially planting seeds that God will grow.
So seed faith is giving and then expect a miracle, right? God will bless you for your faithfulness.
Which fit the mood of the era. The United States felt good as the country prospered. 100 years earlier, there was no electricity. There were no motor vehicles. By the 1950s, you could go to your refrigerator, pull out a frozen dinner, pop it in your electric oven, and after dinner, enjoy a lazy drive to the park.
After World War II, there is this massive economic boom. We do see an explosion in the white middle class. And many of them are evangelicals or Pentecostals like Oral himself, who had been taught that wealth is bad, that wealth is idolatry, right? You'll put your faith in money rather than in God. But now they have all this newfound wealth, so they got to make sense of it.
The most important medium for spreading the prosperity philosophy was television, even aside from the preachers. If you turned on the tube, you'd see middle-class families on shows like Leave It to Beaver with a nice house and a tidy life. Consumerism itself was not new, but now it could be right in front of you all day.
What's new about this consumerism after World War II is its politicization, right? It becomes a positive, right? It becomes a virtue, right? So it becomes a way for people to lift all boats, right? Consumerism can finally bring about equality, right? If you look around you, suburban homes, shopping malls, two-car garages, the affordability of cars, the affordability of homes, that is going to bring about the American dream. What Roberts and other evangelicals begin to do is they add a spiritual element to that, right? Prosperity is not just a sign of kind of a social or economic equality, but it becomes a sign of your faith. Well, consumerism gains this really almost salvific significance, right? It's a sign of your salvation. It's a sign that you trust in God. It's a sign of God's unique blessing in your life.
This makes sense. Evangelicals like Billy Graham were forming close relationships with leaders of industry to fund their large-scale ambitions. So did Roberts.
Robert sees that, and right, what it would suggest is we have a growing faith and belief in the American free enterprise system.
This is an era of maximum fear of communism. It wasn't only a theological shift, it was also a patriotic statement to champion the free market.
Roberts and other prosperity gospel preachers oftentimes did compare United States prosperity to the Soviet Union and other Soviet-controlled countries, arguing that because of America's unique relationship with God, that's why we're prosperous. Jerry Falwell and those fundamentalists rejected the prosperity gospel, but very similar to Roberts, right? They put their faith in free enterprise. So capitalism is not just the investment of capital for profit, right? It's very root, but rather it is a spiritual system, right? It's a godly, ordained economic, social, and political system.
Which, whatever you think of it, is not spelled out in the Bible. The prosperity gospel arrived in homes all across the country, as did the patriotic belief that God would continue to bless the U.S. Oral Roberts literally capitalized on this, building his empire. But there's another man who would eclipse him, who not only bought airtime on radio and television, but who founded a satellite system. A charismatic Christian who downplayed the gifts of the Spirit and spread his organizations farther than Oral Roberts dreamt possible. His name was Pat Robertson. And I could see where this could be confusing because we're going from Oral Roberts to Pat Robertson. Keep that in mind. I'll continue the story after these messages. While you listen to the ads, why not subscribe to the show? It's as simple as hitting the subscribe or follow button in your podcasting app. You'll get the latest episode as it's dropped, and it'll help me by balancing out my download numbers. And did I mention it's free? Okay, here come the ads. Welcome back. Today we're talking about televangelists and Pat Robertson. On March 22nd, 1930, Marion Gordon Robertson entered this world. His older brother liked to stand over his crib and pat Marion's cheeks. Like that. So his parents nicknamed the baby Pat. His father was a U.S. representative and senator from Virginia who opposed the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board, signing the 1956 Southern Manifesto, a document written in part by Strom Thurmond. Senator Robertson was a budget hawk who believed that the U.S. was a Christian nation, and it was our duty to take care of the world. Pat came from a family of privilege, attending a well-known prep school, did a summer tour traveling around Europe, partied in frats. He was deployed to Korea with the Marines, then came home to attend Yale Law School, where he met his wife and married her in a hurry because she was pregnant. This would later be used against him in his political career. Like Bill Bright, Pat was a serial entrepreneur, one who failed time and again. After law school, he left a good-paying job to invest in a company that made electrostatic loudspeakers, and it didn't work. He decided to become a minister before he was a believer. His mother insisted that he speak with an evangelist first, and Pat was saved in 1956. He attended what is now the New York Theological Seminary, and that is where something interesting happened. Pat met a pastor named Harold Bredesen. Soon he was in a group of young people, and many of them received the baptism of the Holy Spirit, speaking in tongues, something he believed to be an African dialect. Bredesen became the pastor of the Dutch Reformed Church in Mount Vernon. He was an unlikely match for a Reformed church, because he was charismatic, and that generally isn't a thing in Reformed churches. Their meetings were kept secret. Robertson was one of his followers, but Bredesen had impacted someone else, John Sherrill, a writer and editor who, according to one historian, became
the most important publicist in introducing the early charismatic movement to broader audiences.
Sherrill went on to co-write the blockbuster book The Cross and the Switchblade, an entry point into the charismatic movement for a lot of people. Which makes it sound like Pat was right in the heart of things. And he kind of was. But it was not a great time for him and his young family. He was adrift. His parents worried about him because he, his wife, and kids lived in a bad neighborhood. Through a convoluted series of events, Pat heard that
There's this UHF TV station for sale in Portsmouth, Virginia.
so he picked up his family and moved there, without first purchasing the TV station. He was almost 30 years old, had children, and just $70 to his name. In 1960, he lowballed the station's owner and took a job at an old Southern Baptist church to make ends meet. The Christian Broadcasting Network, or CBN, was born, with its first station, WYAH. One studio, one camera. 3 years in, they produced just 3 hours of programming each day, but what they made followed the model of Oral Roberts. Then Robertson stumbled into something definitive. His plan was to do a telethon with the goal of getting 700 people to donate $10 a month, what they'd call the 700 Club. They did the telethon and then fell short, but they tried again and again. As their funds increased, so did the strength of their reach as they sought better equipment and invested in new stations. They hired staff like Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. This is John Wigger, history professor at the University of Missouri and the author of PTL, The Rise and Fall of the Evangelical Empire of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker.
So it was a puppet act. They made the puppets themselves, and Tammy would work the puppets behind a little makeshift stage, and Jim would be out front sort of playing the straight man and asking her puppets questions. And it became immensely popular. They had a children's show called Come On Over, and then eventually the Jim and Tammy show. It was immensely successful. In fact, it became the most popular television show on Robertson's television network.
Then came 1965, when CBN struggled to meet its goals.
So CBN had fallen behind financially, and they were doing their annual telethon, and it was about to end, and they basically had not pulled in enough money, enough contributions. And so Jim did a really very emotional appeal to the people that were listening that night. He cried. He told them that if they didn't give, Christian television would end. It was over, that America itself might be lost. And people responded, and it just went on all night. Their phone lines were jammed. People who weren't able to call in actually drove down to the station to turn in checks in the middle of the night. That telethon continued for several days thereafter and raised more money than CBN had ever raised.
Cementing two things: the growth of the network and the ego of Jim Bakker. He was one of the guys who came up with the concept for the flagship show, the 700 Club. It would be a talk format program based on The Tonight Show, starring Robertson and Jim Bakker.
Jim hosted it 2 or 3 times a week, and then Robertson hosted it, and other members of the staff as well. But it became clear that Jim was the most popular of the television hosts. And, that did create friction with Robertson and the rest of the staff.
In 1972, Bakker left, eventually founding his own network, PTL. CBN kept expanding. Most of the programming on the network was not religious. They reran family shows like Father Knows Best, The Andy Griffith Show, and later, The Brady Bunch. While other networks like TBN played up their Pentecostal side,
Yes, sir! Can you feel it, ladies and gentlemen?
Robertson toned it down to make programming more appealing to other denominations. By 1977, CBN had a $20 million budget. In 1980, just 3 years later, it was $50 million. While they weren't as boisterous as Oral Roberts, they did sometimes try gimmicks like he did, like listing donor names on microfilm that was encased in a cross. And as he had from the start, Robertson kept upping the game with new studios in Virginia Beach and using satellites to beam programming around the globe. And business boomed. The Pentecostal and charismatic movements were on the rise in the 1970s. They were going mainstream, as the majority of people watching Christian television saw Pentecostal or charismatic programming, some of which taught the prosperity gospel. What is the prosperity gospel? Here again is Jonathan Root.
The simplest definition of prosperity gospel is that God blesses faithful believers with material prosperity, mental well-being, physical well-being through their positive action.
Especially the idea that
If you are a true believer in Jesus Christ, you will be healthy, you will be wealthy.
an idea, by the way, many evangelicals reject. And it's really hard to square with the life of Jesus, who had no place to rest his head. Even some Pentecostals reject it. One of its early proponents was Oral Roberts, the pioneering televangelist. In chapter 2 of his book, The Miracle of Seed Faith, he lays it out. The more money you give to the work of God, the more you'll get back. So clearly, if you give your money to, Oral Roberts, you will be healthy, wealthy, and wise. Robertson did this too. Instead of seed faith, he called it the law of reciprocity. Same thing, new name. As this prosperity message grew in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, American ideas about economics were also changing. The American economy slowed down after its post-war boom. In the wake of the Reagan Revolution, Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman, growing libertarianism, and trickle-down economics, the 1980s earned the catchphrase, greed is good. Americans, even mainstream evangelicals, started to feel that since they were followers of Christ, they should be prospering. And if they weren't, then it must be because the government was taking too much from their paychecks. They were primed for this by their new theology. Not only that, but prosperity teaching requires that to be prosperous, you must be morally upright before God, leading some Christians to see business leaders, the prosperous, as morally pure. The uncomfortable flip side of that, of course, is that poor people must be there because of their sins. As prosperity teaching became popular, it seeped into churches that would normally disagree with it outright. The country in general became greedier, as the value of the American dollar plummeted due to inflation. It's in this environment that Pat Robertson turned to politics. In the past, he'd been a supporter of Richard Nixon, calling him a
born-again Christian.
And in the 1970s, he said,
"We just haven't been called to enter the arena of political dispute and debate, however much we would like to do so."
But when Nixon fell, "I am not a crook." Yes, he was. Robertson responded like a bunch of other evangelicals with large followings did, by being shocked at Nixon's bad language on the audio tapes. He was a surprising potty mouth for the era, yes, but Nixon was guilty of so much more than that. It didn't seem to matter. Though he'd been burned by Nixon, Robertson and the 700 Club continued to dabble in politics. In 1975, they focused on abortion. His newsletter praised Anita Bryant's efforts to strike down the gay rights bill in Miami, all of which opened his eyes to the ways that Protestants and Catholics could work together on social issues, saying,
"First of all, it shows conclusively that concerned Protestants and Catholics united together have the political muscle to insist on higher standards of decency in America. Second, this lesson will not be lost on those politicians who have been catering to aberrant minorities. Third, it shows that the homosexual lifestyle is deeply repugnant to a majority of Americans."
So, yeah, as the 70s went on, he took stances on social issues and was not apolitical. But in 1976, he was basically nonpartisan on his show. Remember, his dad was a Democratic senator. Pat urged people to support
one of the three Christians which are now in the field: Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, or Jimmy Carter.
It's disputable that Reagan was a true Christian, but we'll get there. When Carter won, a professing born-again believer, Pat was excited. One of his friends was told that if he could get a list of qualified Christians who could fill some of the many positions open in the new administration, Carter would take a look at it. Robertson and his buddy put together a list and flew it to Plains, Georgia, to the president-elect. Imagine that. Pat Robertson, a televangelist, handing the future president a list of appointments. He said,
"We put together a list of potential appointees."
And
Carter rejected all of them.
This slight, mixed with a bunch of other stuff we'll cover later this season. Carter's support for the ERA and Bella Abzug, his failure to take a firm stance on abortion, taking advice from gay leaders, making friends with rock and roll musicians, not to mention the crazy inflation, which was cramping America's burgeoning prosperity culture. This stuff did not sit well with Pat Robertson or other evangelicals with large followings. They'd been preaching that the United States was a Christian nation. But the world they saw on TV was not what they expected. So they met in a hotel at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport to discuss their situation. I covered this in the Bill Bright episode. We'll keep touching on it. This is the one where Billy Graham declared,
"I believe God has shown me that unless we have a change in America, we have 1,000 days as a free nation."
To which Bright responded,
"I know. I do not believe we'll survive more than 3 years as a free nation. It's that serious."
They got together and wrung their hands about the Carter administration. Robertson was there, among these guys, trying to set a plan for the future. A charismatic in a room full of neo-evangelicals and fundamentalists, something that would have been unthinkable a few decades earlier. And these guys did a lot more than just sit around in meetings. They took their conservative message to their audiences. For example, Pat and Bill Bright organized the Washington for Jesus rally. In April 1980, they assembled thousands of people on the National Mall. They declared that the country was gonna fall apart, saying but not saying, unless we got rid of Jimmy Carter. Pat was over the moon about the rally.
I believe the Washington for Jesus rally was one of the greatest moments in the history of America. I believe that it sparked a revolution in our country.
There were other events. Robertson was at the National Affairs briefing later that summer. Check. He participated in and even led the dark money group of conservative Christianity, the Council for National Policy. Big check. In literally both meanings of big check. We'll cover the CNP soon. Wherever you looked in this era, where evangelicals with large followings were talking politics, Robertson was there. That is, except in a few places. He saw some of the leaders of the religious right as being inept. To quote one historian,
Robertson pictured the moral majority as the misguided brainchild of conservative Washington activist Paul Weyrich. He believed it never exhibited the political savvy needed to have a lasting impact.
A total knock on Weyrich, the organizational mind of the new right. Then there was Jerry Falwell's fundamentalism. He thought that the coalition would be too small and brittle if led by a fundamentalist. So while he was present at many of the big moments in the evangelical upsurge, according to historian David Edwin Harold Jr., he remained aloof to the new organizations that formed. He was not as loud in those circles, and he started organizations of his own. But he was there at the meetings. And he was wowed by Reagan saying,
Ronald Reagan is a former Democrat.
Just like Robertson.
Union leader.
Reagan betrayed his union a few different times, but we'll get to that.
Fiscal conservative.
Actually, Reagan ballooned the national debt.
And born-again Christian.
Yeah, no. Well, maybe. If you make some significant concessions. But still, this was high praise. Ronald Reagan, as well as other Republicans, appeared on the 700 Club ahead of the elections. Just a few years earlier, Pat had counseled his followers that Christians should stay above politics. Now, he was in pretty deep. And once Reagan was president, Robertson didn't fawn the way that Falwell did. In 1983, he wrote several letters with complaints. When the president failed conservatives on a number of fronts, Robertson tried to cover for him, comparing him to King Josiah in the Bible.
Good King Josiah made all of the right moves to correct a system of evil that extended back 55 years before him. Yet, despite his most valiant attempts, he was unable to turn back the forces of deterioration which had gripped his people.
In February of 1981, Pat established a group called the Freedom Council. Its first goal, to advertise for an amendment to the Constitution supporting prayer. This is from his prepared statement before Congress.
I would like to express my thanks to you, Senator Thurmond.
Wait, who did he thank? Strom Thurmond? The senator who helped Nixon with his Southern strategy and fought integration of schools? Who championed the Southern Manifesto that Robertson's dad signed? This all ties together.
I would like to express my thanks to you, Senator Thurmond, and to all the members of this distinguished committee for the opportunity to appear before you in support of Senate Joint Resolution 199 to amend the Constitution of the United States in order to restore the freedom of our citizens to join in voluntary prayer in public schools and in other public institutions.
The amendment failed in 1984, one of the many ways that the Reagan administration let down conservative Christians. Though a lot of people in the know knew it wasn't going to pass. Still, the Freedom Council did what it could to resist, quote, attempts to destroy religious freedoms in America. At its peak, tens of thousands of pastors were enrolled. It was essentially the political wing of CBN until it was shut down in 1986. Robertson was an admirer of R.J. Rushdoony. Remember him? The father of Christian homeschooling who thought that homosexuals should be killed by the government? Robertson welcomed Rushdoony as a guest on the 700 Club. He also adapted Rushdoony's ideas to his own, like in his 1982 book, The Secret Kingdom, where he took the law of dominion and turned it into a theological basis for the health and wealth gospel. As Robertson told his TV audience,
God's plan is for his people to take dominion. What is dominion? Dominion is lordship. He wants his people to reign and rule with him.
Though Rushdoony disagreed with religious right guys like Robertson. He didn't think change should come from the top down, but from the bottom up. Rushdoony thought that if we got the family in order, then the country would follow. But a lot of people inspired by Rushdoony were not exactly orthodox in their beliefs. Pat, as we'll discuss in a future episode, literally ran for president of the United States to bring change from the top down. Like so many people, Robertson only adapted Rushdoony's ideas. He didn't buy them outright. So that was a whirlwind of information. And I still haven't told you the half of Pat Robertson's influence. A lot of his biggest swings were after the Reagan years, like when he ran for president in 1988, or his founding of the Christian Coalition, his expanding empire, and support for ruthless dictators. But our season has to have a cutoff point. I'll tell you about all that when we're done with the main topic of this season. To recap, after World War II, there was an economic boom, as people bought refrigerators, houses, cars, contraptions to curl your hair that looked like steampunk electric chairs. They saw this prosperity as confirmation that God blessed the United States and as a way to fight communism. This idea was championed by TV preachers like Oral Roberts, who deeply inspired Pat Robertson, who preached a mixture of prosperity gospel, Republican politics, and moral outrage, all on his vast platform. But let's stop and put the influence of Pat and other televangelists in perspective. All religious programming in 1980 combined reached about 20.5 million people in the US. That's a big number. Maybe hard for us to contemplate. Remember, these guys only had influence if their audiences were perceived as being large. It mattered less to them if their numbers were rooted in reality. For example, in 1980, Jerry Falwell claimed that 25 million people watched the Old-Time Gospel Hour. In reality, it was only about 1.5 million, or about 6% of his brag. He likely mixed up how many people could watch his program with how many people actually did. But at that point, I think it's fair to say he was going beyond exaggeration to a straight lie. Robertson alone brought in $50 million a year for his enterprises. But we also shouldn't overstate his reach. According to the audience metrics company Arbitron, his audience was just 380,460 people. That sounds large, but it's just 2% of the subscribers held by Joe Rogan on YouTube alone, at least at the start of 2025. As big as these televangelists were, and they were a big deal to the people that watched them, if you took their total combined audience in 1980, it wouldn't have as much reach as the Muppet Show alone. But reach doesn't necessarily limit influence. While these guys were schooled by Kermit the Frog and the ratings, their influence reverberated in ways that might seem gonzo. These ideas, however slowly, however hard to measure, seeped into the soil of the American church.
Psst, if you love God, he has to bless you.
Even if a candidate isn't a Christian, we can still pretend he is.
This is a Christian nation.
We can take back the country.
We can take back the country.
We can take back the
We
country.
can take back the country. This season, we've been tracking how some evangelicals tie themselves to the Republican Party. TV, televangelists, the prosperity gospel, Pat Robertson, they all played a role. As Americans were more closed off, less involved in their communities, greedier, less trusting of government, and more suspicious of the poor, they had the company of their TVs. right there, across from their couches, almost like a member of the family, telling them to take back the country and get rich in the process. Fill their houses and museums with junk, doodads, and gadgets. More. And it was beamed into their living rooms through technology invented by a teenage boy in rural Idaho. This episode is a long time in the making, and as I said, I hope to end the season with a rundown of where Falwell, Robertson, and the other guys landed after they bonded evangelicals to the GOP. Because they were a tangled web. So many groups and interlocking issues. And scandal after scandal. Robertson's role in this gets so much bigger in the late 1980s. You'll see. Thanks to Professor John Wigger for participating in my interview. We'll hear more from him later this season. His book is PTL, The Rise and Fall of the Evangelical Empire of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker. Thanks also to Jonathan Root, author of Oral Roberts and the Rise of the Prosperity Gospel. We had a great chat. Patrons of the show can hear more with him at patreon.com/trucepodcast. I used a number of sources for this episode, including Pat Robertson, A Life and Legacy by David Edwin Harold Jr., and Primetime Preachers by Jeffrey K. Haddon and Charles E. Swan, plus a whole lot more. I'll give a full list of sources on the website and in your show notes if you want to dig into them yourself. Special thanks to my friends who loaned me their voices for this episode, including Chris Sloan, Josh Griffith, Kenneth Forte, Dave Monroe, and Bob Stevenson. And yes, Truce is listener supported. I can't guarantee you any rewards from God if you support this show, but the fact is, we have to pay for things that we like in this world. If you want more in-depth episodes like this one, stuff that isn't being covered by other people, visit trucepodcast.com/donate. There you can learn how to give via PayPal, credit card, Patreon, Venmo, or good old-fashioned check. That's trucepodcast.com/donate. Thanks also to my brother Nick Staron, who proofread this episode and provided some critical feedback. He also let me use his voice from our videos at the Farnsworth TV and Pioneer Museum. I love small-town museums, and this one is the definition of the genre. Please subscribe to the podcast so you get every new episode as it's released. And if you're still on social media, and why are any of us still on social media, you can find Truce on a bunch of different platforms. Please share it with your friends. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Staron, and this is Truce.